О, это тот самый ублюдок жирный.
Thomas, come on.
It's always held up.
Это рождение Томаса! Ух, самый интригующий момент. Офигеть. Всем привет, друзья, меня зовут Рома, и 4 части мы уже посмотрели ужасов паровозика Томаса от Звездного Капитана, и несколько из них было про Депо 17. Но саму короткометражку Депо 17 мы с вами не смотрели, и сегодня я хочу это исправить. Это будет долгое видео, поэтому готовьте себе всякие сладости, вкусняшки. Я вот себе налил колу, в общем-то, реально подготовился. Самая твоя лучшая благодарность для меня — это лайк под видео. Поехали смотреть. Так. О, тот самый Содор. Да, остров Содор. Про остров Содор. 82 год. Мы знаем очень много благодаря Звездному Капитану. О, Томас. Уже музыка такая. О-хо-хо-хо-хо. А, наши дни. А, типа это показывали прошлое и теперь наши дни. Понятно. Это кадры из настоящего мультика? Или это уже смонтированное? Что-то страшное. Оу, 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 оу. Это Томас? Это ржавый Томас?
Stories that have charmed an entire generation. From the books to the television series, people around the world have grown up with the railway stories, and all their cheerful characters. But the truth behind Thomas and his friends was no children's fantasy. The truth would be horrifying.
Ну да, ужасы паровозика мы с вами уже смотрели. Мы знаем то, что это что-то страшное. Депо 17.
It is 1945, and the remote island of Sodor, off the northwest coast of England, has emerged from the fog of World War II, relatively unscathed and untouched.
The island served as a detention camp for Germans living in England. That's how Professor came to be here.
Professor Wilhelm Goetze was born in 19...
Да, Вильгельм Готце, Вильгельм, это отец Томаса, нам сейчас его предысторию рассказывают.
1903 in Munich, Germany. A doctor in biology,
Да,
he
врач.
became a prominent advisor to the ruling party in the 30s.
Wenn die älteren Jahrgänge noch wanken werden könnten, die Jugend ist uns verschrieben und verfallen mit Leib.
Ужасное
In
время.
1939, as war escalated, he, his wife Olga, and 4-year-old son
Ганс.
Hans fled the country.
Подожди, стоп, это не Томас, это другой же. Это врач.
Ja, ich habe nie einen solchen Befehl bekommen. Er hat einmal gefragt, nicht wahr? Am 14. Mai 1942 war der Großadmiral Räder und ich bei ihm.
That's what he wanted people to believe. The fact is, his experiments were hard to stomach even for his own people.
In truth, he had become a prominent figure in the government, but as his work progressed, questions and objections had been raised in the higher echelons of the Reich.
His work with genetics and DNA was truly pioneering. The cracking and manipulating of the human genome. What Professor Goetze was most successful in, however.
Ну, понятно, что тебе сейчас рассказывают, что был успешный врач, он был, можно сказать, советником, да, приближенным у самого верховного тогда правителя, да, все мы знаем, какого, не буду называть его имя, потому что могут дать демонетизацию ролика или заблокировать видео. Ну, все мы это знаем.
Was keeping his history a secret
Да.
until his death.
In an attempt to gain favor among the German hierarchy, Wilhelm Goetze was at the forefront of the government's most fanatical policies. In 1938, he was influential in instigating the infamous Sajmelnacht, the Night of Sawdust. But, as his experiments advanced, he became a much less popular figure and soon feared for his and his family's lives.
As soon as he escaped to England, he was banged up here. But the locals were nice to him. There was no hostility, and many of them chose to live here after the war.
Following their release, Professor Goetze, Olga, and young Hans chose to remain. After studying under his father, Hans left at the age of 18 and went to university on the mainland, studying biology and engineering, writing several pioneering papers about genetics and the splicing of DNA with mechanical implants.
О, скрещивание людей с механическими имплантами.
Called it biofusion.
Biofusion. Вот.
The technique of manipulating genetic material to splice with mechanical attachments. However, much like his father, the British government became more and more concerned with Hans Goetze's proposals. So he was forced to seek financial backing from home.
His dad left Germany with quite a few bob, so Hans came back. He saw our little island as some sort of refuge where he could work in peace. Soon every nutcase and eccentric was coming over.
By 1962, Hans had set up Sodor
Research,
a small lab near the town of Alsborough, but soon the enterprise began supplying medical equipment and machinery, and quickly grew to become a large
то самое
complex comprising its
депо!
own links to the growing Sodor rail system.
Young Abby Collins from the town was working there when Professor Hans took a liking to her. Soon they were married, and not long after, the
Это получается уже про сына, да, доктор рассказывает.
town was buzzing with
Вильгельм, это его отец, и Ганс, сейчас речь идет про Ганса.
news of her pregnancy.
Baby Thomas was born in 1968. Throughout the early years of his life, he would watch the growing railway network with fascination.
He couldn't get enough of trains. His dad bought
Он же любил снимать видео.
him one of the first
Да.
video cameras, and he'd be on the platforms every day. You can see me in some of those tapes.
Hiya, Mr. Hartley.
Morning, Thomas. But he was friends with everyone, even that simple bloke who could only say where he lived.
Sodor.
But his favourite trains were the old steam engines.
Да, ему нравились паровые машины, причем старые.
Steam engines were a dying art on the British mainland, but Hans also had a fondness for them, much like his son, and likes to keep them running for our purposes, taking orders from the labs to the growing docks, or to the mainland to be transferred to modern postal express trains.
But as the Sodor rail system expanded, it found itself increasingly under the supervision of the new British rail network and appointed a new controller.
Oi, get off my f***ing platform!
О, это тот самый ублюдок жирный. Пес по всем признакам, который пес.
Sir Topham Hatt. Born into money, he took his ridiculous
Sir
name
Hat.
to heart and started wearing a top hat all the time. Of course, the islanders had a different name for him.
Fat bastard. You've never met such a cold-hearted as him. He banned all steam engine volunteers and cut most at rail employees. Shut down the branch line and the smaller stations. He was happy to let the railway rust away, just like they did to main line.
But the fortunes of the railway were about to take a profitable turn, a stroke of luck for the island that would result from tragedy.
О,
Come on, we're gonna be late.
это тот самый момент.
Time. Thomas, get moving.
Young Thomas loved following railway. He'd be out all the time, hoping to catch a new train on his camera.
11:45's coming through soon. He won't wait for us.
Unfortunately, he didn't take as
Это момент, когда Томас погиб.
much notice of the safety signs.
I'm not being late again. Have we missed it yet? Wait for the 11:45. Never mind the 11:45. It must be late again. Thomas, come on. It's always held up.
Hans was mortified. He disappeared from public view and into the labs. Locking himself in, he wouldn't allow anyone in there. Eventually his father Wilhelm came to see him.
Мне, знаете, интересно посмотреть, как его вообще, вот этот самый момент, когда его восстанавливали, когда из Томаса превращали вот этот вот поезд.
In a few days, a major laboratory had been locked down,
Паровоз.
followed by an engine maintenance shed, which was to become off limits to all. All production was shut down, orders weren't met, but the two Professor Godzes didn't care. More and more equipment was being delivered daily, but no one was allowed in Shed 17. Questions started being asked on Sodor. Where were the Goetzes? Would there be no funeral for young Thomas? And where was the body?
Да, тело украли, в общем. Ну, не то, что украли, тело просто взяли в эту лабораторию, из него сделали паровоз.
They'd arranged for Thomas to be transferred to a mainland hospital. He'd been taken to the complex but was never moved by rail. We all assumed the obvious, he was still in lab.
But if Thomas was there, was he still alive? And what was the purpose of keeping him at the complex? Almost a year after the accident, the doors of Sodor Research were reopened. In an open invitation
Это рождение
to the people of the
Томаса!
island, Thomas rolled out of Shed 17.
It took me a
О
moment
мой
to realise
бог!
what it was I was looking at. When he looked at me and said,
Hiya, Mr. Hartley.
it dawned on me what Hans Goetzer and his dad had done. One woman passed out as Thomas smiled at us. I had to run off around the side of the shed.
Hey, are you alright, Keith?
As news spread across the
Вау,
country, the
вау.
world's media rushed to Sodor Island.
Ну да, в общем-то, это привлекло СМИ со всего мира, то, что из мальчик, который погиб на вот этих рельсах, да, сделали паровоз.
They kept trying to interview me. I became a bit of a celebrity.
Controversy on Sodor Island. Questions asked about science ethics.
It's fair
Скорее
to
всего,
say
еще
I
будет очень много сюжета про этого жирного ублюдка.
was pretty nervous at
I'm
times,
joined now by Keith Hartley.
but I think I put on a brave face.
What did you think when you first came to meet Thomas the Tank Engine?
Вы... Это просто первая реакция. Что вы думаете, когда увидели ужас паровозика Томаса?
Most of my mates said I looked pretty good on telly. The mayor said I'd represented the people of Sodor very well. It's important to show
Содорский
you're
эксперимент.
confident when people are asking you awkward questions.
Good evening. An act of mercy or a crime against humanity. I am joined now by Keith
Even when
Hartley.
some of the questions got difficult, I made sure I knew what I was talking about.
What was your reaction when you first met a talking tank engine?
If you can't make an
Какой
informed
ужас!
opinion, or if you can't string together two words on telly, well, maybe you shouldn't.
Я так понимаю, чувак, у которого берут интервью, это работник депо, да? Какой-то дефолт.
Be on there. Admittedly, the subject matter was a bit bizarre sometimes.
There are some dark forces at work here.
You were alright as long as you could win
Его
over
тошнило на всех интервью, что ли?
the audience.
They're laughing at you. They're not laughing with you.
The Goetze family refused to answer any questions.
Goetze.
Behind closed doors, the only question they agreed to answer had been asked repeatedly. Would Thomas work on the railway? The response was an emphatic no.
Thomas's DNA had been reprogrammed to accept and adapt to the engine structure,
Это понятно.
using the engine's internal system to maintain his organic functions. What no one could be sure of was how much of the engine was mechanical and how much was organic material.
Thomas had been able to move around without coaches.
Да, то есть он работал, мог работать без топлива, и это на самом деле великое достижение. Это великий содорский эксперимент.
But to work on the railway, his engine would need to be fired up and operated by a driver and fireman.
Since no one could be sure how much of the engine was Thomas, the pressure caused by the engine could rupture his organs from the inside. and the incredible heat could boil him alive. Professor Hans and his father vowed Thomas would never work on the railways.
Similarly, the two professors were to refuse many requests by people from around the world who wished to be biofused into engines.
There were billionaires offering to pay whatever they wanted to be converted into an engine or some other transport. Train enthusiasts too, and people with terminal illnesses were desperate to be made into trains.
То есть вот рассказывают то, что многие люди захотели также, да, захотели бессмертия и превращаться в паровозиков. Ребята, кстати, ответьте, вы бы хотели в паровозика превратиться? Или хотели бы умереть, как бы, ну, спокойно? Либо хотели бы бессмертия? Вот вы уже отвечали на этот вопрос, но ответьте еще раз под видео с Депо 17.
But there would be other interested parties, eager to seize on the biofusion gold mine. The independently wealthy Topham Hatt staged a hostile takeover and within weeks had bought a controlling share in Sodor Research.
Immediately, the policy of the company changed, and so did the ethics. The medical supply wing was shut down, and work began on mass biofusion experiments.
Начались массовые эксперименты.
And operations. Anyone who could afford it, some handing over their whole fortunes, were turned into engines.
But, along with the new policy, there would be worse to come. Biofused engines would be allowed, then obliged, to work on the railways.
The first one we fired up was James. He didn't have the money some of these people had, and so agreed to basically sign his life away if they wanted to experiment further, or to take massive risks like this. As usual, the fat had everything recorded. All kept classified, you understand?
These recordings, shown for the first time, reveal the extent of Sir Topham Hatt's experiments.
То есть, в общем-то, с богатой руки сэра Топхэма Хэта, да, были поставлены все следующие эксперименты и уродцы, вот эти вот паровозики, которые ничего не могли, да? Да, для туристов, для того, чтобы поглазеть, ну, в общем-то, для денег, потому что был жадный богач, жадный толстяк, жирный ублюдок.
But, with the new engine's increasing work schedule, came more and more accidents.
Вот другие паровозики вообще никак не смотрятся. Вы посмотрите на них. Вот это Генри, да? Вот это Генри? Или как его зовут?
Edward was first to have problems. He'd been filming all day for the new TV series they'd announced, and for his last scene, he had to pull into Wellsworth Station and whistle to the kids on the platform.
Whistled Edward. Thank you very
Не, Томас единственный из паровозиков, кто смотрится, ну, максимально мило, да, и не враждебно. Вот что самое главное.
Sadly, this was only the first in an increasing number of incidents.
Harold had an obsession with aircraft and had paid to become a helicopter. The operation had gone well, but we had to ban him from being allowed to attempt flight.
Блин, я хочу, чтобы из этого сделали фильм. Полноценный фильм. Это какой же офигенный получился бы фильм ужасов.
In an experiment kept secret until now, Mavis the diesel engine was to be the first biofused locomotive used on the railway.
We fueled her up and everything seemed fine. Then things got out of hand.
The diesel began to burn her internal organs. Everything organic in the engine was soon burning.
У них сжигались внутренние органы от дизеля.
The locomotive scream in pain. We tried rinsing out the fuel tank with water, but by then it was too late.
Mavis's body would be kept under lock and key indefinitely. In an unexpected U-turn, Sir Topham Hatt would ban fueled engines from being used on the island.
Harold was never told why he couldn't.
Не, ну и так понятно, что на топливе им работать нельзя, потому что там внутри находятся живые органы.
Fly, but the decision would keep him alive, if only for a little while longer.
In fact, unknown to the outside world, there had been many failed biofusion experiments.
That fat kept the accidents a
А где сейчас этот толстяк находится? Вот там нам про это расскажут.
Secret. And legal disclaimers had to be signed by anyone being biofused. So there'd be no legal action taken if anything went wrong.
This footage shows engines being displayed to tourists during the off-season. Many of these engines were failed biofusion experiments and were too ill to work or were already dead.
They had to put a stop to that though.
О, тот самый момент!
With all accidents happening, everyone started asking the same thing. Why had Thomas, the first engine, worked so well?
Ну, над Томасом единственное постарались. Ну, потому что над ним работал этот чувак, Ганс, а остальные были созданы вот так вот тяп-ляп и готово.
Troubles the other engines had. Thomas had worked fine, seemingly oblivious to the other engines' problems and accidents.
Keeping their problems a secret from the outside world, Sodor Research began selling the technology to other countries in multi-million-pound deals. These countries would have less qualms about the use of fuel engines, and even the modern electric trains, even failed by...
Там даже была Россия, понимаете? Там даже была Россия.
Biofused engines were being displayed publicly in what would become a kind of freak show.
О, фу!
Professor Hans saw what this was leading to.
А, это было в мультике! Это было в мультике!
Slavery of engines.
Знаете, про что нужно сделать ролик Звездному Капитану? Про уродов из мира паровозика Томаса и его друзей. Потому что, ну вот эти вот двойной паровозик, это что вообще такое?
Immediately resigned. His father, Wilhelm, would go one step further.
Что такое? Это Вильгельм. О, нет. О, нет. А я вот этого не помню, кстати. О, нет, нет! О, черт! А я не помню этого вообще. Ну да, когда это, ну, на самом деле, стандартная история, да, когда забирают разработку профессора, да, и делают из нее какое-то зло. Ну, в общем-то, довольно-таки предсказуемо, да, что Вильгельм так поступил.
That fat got all of us rail staff over to his house to clean up after the body was taken away. You should have seen it. Sawdust everywhere. It took us days.
But such attempts to keep the incidents on Sodor a secret were short-lived after a very public accident.
Gordon paid an enormous amount to be Sodor's first 462 configuration engine. Much bigger than any other engine at the time. We were terrified that fat shit would make us fire up that huge engine.
А его постоянно называют жирный дебил, там жирный ублюдок, жирное чмо, просто везде его так называют.
We were shocked to discover he had insisted on being able to work on the railway. So, one night, after the regular staff had finished for the day, fat some of the rail staff and I fired up the engine.
As usual, these experiments were filmed. This footage has never been broadcast before.
Dr. Ruth and I filmed it all.
It might be a bit shaky. It was handheld. At first, Gordon complained about the heat. Then that turned to pleas to douse the fire.
Это все-таки был Гордон, я был прав. Но я просто путаю там, кто там, Кевин и Гордон, или как там второго зовут?
But that fat bastard held us back. He wanted to see what would happen.
He argued he had put a lot of work into Gordon, and the chances to get him working were too great an opportunity. He was literally cooking from the inside. By the time we were about to act, it was too late.
Вот эти вот все кадры смертей, да, паровозиков не всегда меня пугали, даже с первой части.
I wasn't as near to him as some of them. All I could do was run. I was lucky to get away with some singed clothes. Others weren't so lucky.
The fateful few hours following the accident would seal the fate of Sodor Research.
The fat stopped us trying to put out the fire, insisting that any evidence would fall back on us.
He kept repeating, "This was all your fault. You knew the dangers. You're legally to blame." He stopped us calling for ambulances or the fire brigade.
We told him, these are injured people here. They're going to die unless we do something. But he kept saying, no one from the outside can come in. No one can see this.
Finally, someone suggested we airlift them to hospital.
Вертолет.
Harold was banned from flying for his own safety, but we thought the risk was worth it.
Fueling Harold was a nervous experience. Would he have the same reaction Mavis had?
We all breathed a sigh of relief and loaded the injured people aboard. Then it all went wrong.
Нет!
Harold's engine had worked fine, but what no one realized was most of Harold's lower extremities were permanently fused to his propeller system.
As Harold's rotor blades began to spin, vital organs would be drawn into the motor and tear him apart from the inside.
Well, now there was no covering it up. The smoke could be seen all morning, but news people were here in an instant. We were told to close gates and start clearing up the mess ourselves, with some help.
Henry Thierry was the only
Генри. Подожди, Генри.
420 gauge engine on the island. A large engine that had been working on the railway regularly. He had become...
Подожди, Гордон? Генри! Генри и Гордон, вот. Не Кевин, а Генри, вот.
Popular among tourists and the locals.
Henry was called into the yard to help tidy the mess, working mostly at night.
Да, Генри отвозил обломки, ну, перевозил эти, в общем-то, трупы, можно сказать, паровоза.
We had to work quickly and quietly. Henry would cart wreckage from the yard away to the sea. Then one night, the points were set wrong, and we were diverted to another shed.
Henry had inadvertently been sent to shed number 17.
Почему переводится депо как сарай? Shed 17, это, по сути, это депо 17.
Where Thomas had been biofused into a tank engine and had subsequently been declared out of bounds.
It was dark, and these sheds all looked the same. I unlocked the doors and Henry rolled in. I didn't see what Henry saw, because as soon as he put his head through doors, he bolted and reversed out.
О, Генри увидел то, что ему не нужно было видеть.
Without seeing what was inside. But Henry had seen it all.
We wouldn't even dare talk about that shed, more than our job's worth.
But Henry had decided to speak up and confront Sir Topham Hatt. That night, he arrived at the railway controller's office.
Генри красавчик, на самом деле. Ребята, кто уважает Генри, пожалуйста, плюсните в чат.
I don't know what was said in there, but there were raised voices at times. They had a shouting match for 10 minutes. Then Henry left, back to the shed.
By pure chance, he was sent back to the same shed as Thomas that night, and with one sentence, he sealed both their fates.
Henry only said one thing to him: stay away from shed 17. The next day, the fat had a new job for him.
А с Генри же тоже что-то случилось, да? С Генри после этого.
The Flying Keeper route ran through the night, delivering fish from the docks to the mainland, across the highest altitude line in the country.
That old line was treacherous at best, but when Henry was put on there, in the middle of winter, it was a death trap.
Он сейчас сменит эти рельсы, да? Что-то такое.
In 1970, fish had started being delivered by road to the mainland. It was safer and more cost-effective, and the line was declared redundant. Dangerous and unnecessary, it came as a shock to the islanders when it was reopened.
Его просто в ловушку загнали.
He always hated Henry. He didn't like his cheerful manner, and he clearly had other lifestyle choices when he was a human. Fat wanted Henry away from the other engines, and Kipper
Да, это был его приговор. Ну типа, блин, Генри красавчик.
Was a death sentence.
On the night of February the 8th, 1983, Henry had only been on the Kipper rung for a week. The following incident would be made into a book and later recreated in the television series.
This is the train the railwaymen call the Flying Kipper.
Can you believe they put it in a kid's story? Of course, that fat f***er changed quite a few of their facts.
They couldn't know the points from the main line to a siding were frozen, and the home signal should have been set at danger, but snow had forced it down.
As the train approached the most treacherous part of the line, unnoticed to Henry, his driver and firemen, the points had diverted them to the adjoining siding and right into the path of another train.
О, черт! Жесть.
Henry's driver and fireman had jumped clear before the crash.
In fact, Al and Barry died from their injuries.
Вот было бы классно, если бы они выжили и дали бы интервью в СМИ.
Slowly, in snow, the poor b****s.
By midday, the recovery operation was underway, and Sir Topham Hatt had arrived.
Cheer up, Henry, it wasn't your fault. Ice and snow caused the accident.
These images from a train spotter's camera were taken the evening
Вот, он меняет направление!
successfully
Он меняет
covered up by the
направление!
Sodor Railway Board for 10 years.
There was a railway spike in points, blocking them. Of course, that had disappeared by the time we got there.
I'm sending you to Crewe, a fine place for sick engines.
Crew. We all knew what that meant.
They'll give you a new shape and a larger firebox.
Crewe was, at the time, one of only 2 scrap metal yards in the UK capable of handling and recycling organic material as well as engine parts.
You'll feel a different engine and won't need special coal anymore.
With those few words, he'd sentence Henry to death.
Нет.
Won't that be nice? Yes, sir, said Henry doubtfully.
Everyone knew he wouldn't see him again. And everything was sewn up.
Ребята, пишите в комментариях, что вы думаете об этом жирном ублюдке. Вот это очень важно, ребят. Что вы о нем... А вдруг кто-то его поддерживает? Вот фиг знает вообще. У меня я смотрю просто с упоением. Мне нравится это.
Nice and neat for that fat As news got out about Henry's accident, it didn't take long for Thomas to realise Henry had been disposed of because of what he knew.
Ну, Томас знал про всю эту кухню, и, в общем-то, ну, что он сделает? Что он сделает?
The next evening, Thomas had been put on his own for the night at Knapford Station. As his driver and fireman left, under what was left of his own steam, he set off for the Sodor Research Complex.
He had a small amount of burning fuel in his firebox, but he was mostly moving under his own strength. It took Thomas 3 hours to get to the complex, the effort to get there nearly killing him.
Thomas arrived at midnight. With no one around, he made his way to the shed where he was created. What he found was the answers to his questions, and many others.
Since Sodor Research had begun producing biofuels vehicles, the world had asked, why had the first biofusion operation worked so well, but nearly every operation since had failed? Sadly, Thomas found the reasons.
Подожди, получается, кончина Томаса уже пошла, да? Вот это тот самый момент, когда Томаса не стало. А, вот оно! Вот оно!
Thomas had never been the first operation. He hadn't even been second.
What shed number 17 contained was evidence of several attempts to create a tank engine with Thomas's DNA. These had been early tests made by people with no experience of an experiment on this scale. Ill-planned and unprepared, these procedures had used DNA.
Блин, ребята, у меня мурашки идут вообще, просто такие мурашки.
Human Thomas and had been as much the real Thomas as the tank engine the world had come to know and love.
To us, Thomas the Tank Engine had been the Thomas we all knew as a boy. Part of the family the whole island's population had known and respected since Wilhelm first arrived.
In actuality, this tank engine was no more the real Thomas than all the failed creations made over the 12 months before.
This Thomas had all the human Thomas's memories and experiences. He had learned what Thomas had learned, known who Thomas had known, but so had all the previous failures.
Wilhelm and Hans Goetze had to learn through trial and error how to bring their Thomas back from the dead. The following
Подожди, а что произошло с Гансом? Я это пропустил? Они просто где-то там живут? Вот эта вот семья, которая у Томаса? Или что с ним стало-то?
Experiments had not had the same work put into them, resulting in the freak engines and aircraft that had developed so many problems on Sodor Island and around the world. In Shed 17, Thomas wouldn't discover who he was, but in fact, who he wasn't.
Ух, самый интригующий момент. Окей. Жесть. Какая дичь! О, чёрт!
He had no idea he was only one of many clones. None of us did. But I guess
Он не знал то, что он, в общем-то, эксперимент.
we stopped asking all the questions we had at first. We were just glad our friend was back with us. He could work for us. He became our servant in a way. Someone who drew in the crowds, helped create jobs, was eager to work. Thomas always thought of us as his friends. Sadly, over time we came to think of him as just really useful.
Вау! Офигеть. Офигеть. Ну вот что было после, да? Биофьюжн, ну, было прикрыто все это производством. Топхэм. Ну вот что было после? Что было после? Ну, что везде это было закрыто. Везде это было закрыто. Тибет?
今日會有一批水果同蔬菜抵達碼頭嘅。 我要你將食物送去納福站，繼續做你自己日常嘅工作啦。
哦，哦。Какой ужас! Ну что, ребята, мы посмотрели полностью Депо 17. Какие у вас остались впечатления после этого? Пишите комментарии развернутые. Не забывайте ставить лайк, если вам понравилось, и подписываться на мой канал. Меня зовут Рома. Не прощаюсь с вами. Увидимся завтра на новом видео в 3 часа дня.